Businesses are made up of risk and reward. Everything we do, from opening the office in the morning to launching a new product, has risk associated with it. If we don't pay attention to the risks and they happen without us doing anything about them, they could lead to financial loss, loss of reputation, and in the worst case, it could even lead to your business closing. Every action you take, unless you consider the risks involved, could spell disaster. We all think about risks. It's natural to think about what might happen if, or if I do this, what is the outcome going to be? Most of the time, though, we simply ignore them. We kind of lodge them in the back of our head and we don't really do anything about them. Sometimes this works and we get away with it. Sometimes it doesn't and bad things happen. And if you're caught, metaphorically speaking, with your pants down, you could be in for a whole world of trouble. Luckily, thinking about risks, discovering them and assessing them doesn't have to be difficult. And doing something about them ahead of time to minimize them or reduce them entirely is often much, much easier than you think. In this video, we're going to be talking about risk discovery. That's uncovering the risks to the assets in your business. We're not going to talk about assessment. We're not going to talk about mitigation. We're going to save those for another video. So strap in. It's about to get exciting. My name is Mike Pearce and this is my series on information security. Every week I'm going to be bringing you some simple ideas and some not so simple but still pretty important ones for you to implement in your business. These ideas are about how to protect and maintain the information security of your business and make it difficult for cyber criminals to steal your stuff and use it for their own nefarious ends. It can be a dry and boring topic, but I'm going to do my best to, if not make it fun, at least make it interesting. This is stuff you should care about because at its heart, it's about keeping your business safe and sustainable for the long term or helping you deliver on your business goals. I do hate saying this, but like this video and subscribe. And if we can get the word out there and get enough people watching it, we can make the internet a safer place. Every decision you make or every action you take in life as in business could have some unintended consequences. Simply existing can be a risky business because there are forces in this world that we don't have any control over. So thinking about these forces and the consequences to the stuff we do and what this could mean for your business is a necessary and actually a pretty healthy activity to take part in, to do at your business. Writing down these potential consequences and the internal and external forces that might impact your business helps make them a little bit less scary and potentially provide some insight in how to do better in the future, how to scale your business, how to grow, and how to avoid things that might stop you from doing that. Understanding what impact risks have to your business, your project, your next activity has multiple benefits. Imagine you're launching a new product or service. You want to know ahead of time what bad things might happen while you're creating this new service or building this new project. In order to prevent any kind of loss of time or money or any kind of resources really. But thinking about risks also helps you improve your decision making. Identifying big risks associated with a new product, for example, might inform as to whether you even build that product in the first place. Thinking about the risks around building a new product or a new service would definitely help you prepare should the worst happen, and it would help you inform how you go about building it, who you're going to need to help you building it, and what other kind of resources you're going to need to do so. It also increases the confidence amongst your stakeholders because they're going to be thinking, this guy has got his head screwed on. He's thinking about what might happen before it even happens. It also helps you be more compliant in certain regulated industries and enhances your reputation amongst your peers as somebody who does things properly. It also allows you to better optimize your resources and will definitely give you a competitive advantage if you've got some idea of what might go wrong before it goes wrong and your competitors don't. And ultimately, it makes your organization much, much more resilient. So, what does a risk look like? We've all done some level of risk discovery in the past, even if you're doing it unconsciously. You'll look both ways before you cross the road and you'll put your hand under the running shower to see what the temperature is so you don't get scalded or frozen before you get into it. In business, when people think about risk and you ask somebody, what are the risks involved with this? They'll often come up with stuff like, oh, my data might get deleted, or the office could catch fire, or key employees might leave, or even something as generic as product delivery might be delayed. Now these are all okay, they give you some idea of what might go wrong, but they're not really detailed enough. They don't give you enough information about the risk to know what to do about it. To do good risk discovery and later do proper risk assessment and mitigation, you need to unpack these risks into assets, threats, vulnerabilities, and consequences. And you're in luck because that's what we're about to do right now. A good risk allows you to understand what would happen to one of your valuable assets, how it would happen, and what the consequences are of that risk happening. When you have your risks written down in such a way that allows you to really understand it and to share that risk with other people, it becomes much, much easier to know what, if anything, to do about it. And this is where the value of proper risk discovery comes from. A properly written risk will allow you to know exactly what to do about it, or even if you want to fix it in the first place. First step in writing a really coherent risk is to understand what is at risk in the first place. You should have a list of all the assets that your organization or your company considers valuable. Hopefully you've watched my other video on how to make your information asset register. If not, click the link above and come back here afterwards. If you haven't done that or you don't want to do that, don't worry, we can start with a pretty generic set of risks that will be applicable to most organizations. You'll just have to customize it yourself. If you do use this generic list of assets, you might run the risk, pun intended, of missing out some of your more valuable assets, so it's definitely worth doing that. But if not, don't worry, let's crack on. Now, you can use a spreadsheet to do this, or you can use a whiteboard, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. The idea is to get this stuff out of yours and your colleague's head onto something that you can start managing it properly. Eventually, it'll end up on a spreadsheet as a risk register, or maybe you're going to use a specific risk tool for managing your risks. But either way, it's good to start doing this somewhere you can freestyle it first. So these are some of the assets that you're going to have at your organization. Generally speaking, customer data. So this is stuff about your customers, their email addresses, their contact details, maybe even their payment details. The data that's in your app or your service, this might be data that belongs to your customers. If you're building a software as a service product, it's going to be the data that they put into the system. Employee data. You're going to have data about your employees, their dates of birth, their rights to work, their financial details, maybe their passport, their birthdays, that kind of stuff. Financial data, this is data about your organization. It's going to be spreadsheets around projected budgets. It's going to be your bank details. It's going to be your investment stuff, all that kind of thing. Marketing data in your CRM, goes without saying, it's where you're going to put all your customers and your potential customers. Code for the software you write, that's going to live somewhere like GitHub or GitLab or Azure or something like that. Keys and secrets. So you might use a password manager. That's data you're going to store about accessing systems. You might have keys that you're using in your cloud services as well to access your servers. Product knowledge. So this is data about your products, roadmaps, strategy. It might be in people's heads. It might be written down in wikis like Confluence or other places like Google Docs. Your reputation is an intangible asset. It's what people think about your organization. Finally, your IP, your intellectual property, the thing that makes your product or your company valuable. So if we start to look at the data from the risks that we used a bit earlier, the kind of generic risks that everybody writes, you'll find that they're not really that useful. So if we go back to these, it's going to be things like data gets deleted, office catches fire, laptop gets stolen, product delivery is delayed, employees leave, that kind of thing. It doesn't really give you much information about what the data is or who the employees are or why it's important that they might leave. So we can start to break those initial risks, which you might have done in a brainstorm, down into something a bit more useful. So if we talk about data gets deleted or data gets stolen or data gets altered, we might say the customer data gets deleted or employee data gets stolen or our CRM data gets modified. Once you've got your list of assets that are valuable to you and might be at risk, we can then move on to the next step of understanding how they're at risk. Now you can start to think about what would actually happen to these assets. The things that happen to assets are called threats. So taking the example of customer data, what kind of threats would there be to your customer data? Threats to data usually fall into three categories. They could be altered, stolen, or destroyed and deleted. But data doesn't just get deleted or stolen. There isn't some evil wizard who's going to just wave his magic wand and it happens. There's some reason that this stuff gets deleted or altered. For data to be deleted or altered, somebody has to have access to it. So if a threat actor has access to your data, then we call this unauthorized access. So we can start to write the risk out like this. My customer data is threatened by unauthorized access, and unauthorized access is your threat. This covers altered, stolen, or deleted data. Deleted, altered, or stolen data are pretty much the same level of badness, and so we don't really need to break them down into whether my data is deleted, altered, or stolen. Just having unauthorized access is enough of a threat. But your data could be deleted or altered in other ways. You might have some errant code in your app that has deleted or altered the data when you didn't want it to. So we can have another risk, which would be my customer data is threatened by incorrectly written code. As a final example, we can look at product knowledge as an asset. Using one of the examples before where we had key employees leave, we could look at that as a risk. So our risk might be our product knowledge, which is our asset, is threatened by senior product manager leaving. This could also be technical. You could have our technical product knowledge is threatened by a senior engineer leaving. In this instance, the fact that the staff are leaving is the threat. One final example, just to make it super clear, is if we're talking about laptops, you might say A company laptop is threatened by a burglar, because we know burglars steal things. But unauthorized access doesn't just happen. A laptop doesn't just end up in a burglar's swag bag, and people, generally speaking, don't just leave an organization for no reason. As I mentioned, threats are bad things that can happen to assets in your organization, like data being accessed by unauthorized people, by laptops being stolen, or by key people leaving. But threats don't just happen. Data doesn't magically become exposed to unauthorized access. Laptops don't somehow surprisingly end up in somebody's bag. Threats have vulnerabilities. So we go back to our examples, we can use the laptop being stolen by a burglar as the easiest example to unpack to explain vulnerabilities. Now imagine there's a burglar standing outside your office. He's not doing anything, he's just standing there. There's definitely a threat to the office. They're a burglar, they've got a swag bag and probably a mask on, but they're not actually doing anything at the moment. They are just the potential of a threat right now. For them to actually steal a laptop, they'd need to exploit a weakness or a vulnerability in your office defenses. Some of the potential weaknesses or vulnerabilities in this example are that the fire door might have been left open, maybe the alarm wasn't set, maybe you didn't vet the cleaners. So we can record this risk like this. A company laptop is threatened by a burglar due to a window being left open. Or a company laptop is threatened by a burglar due to the alarm not being set. Or a company laptop is threatened by a burglar due to tailgating of staff. So doing it this way allows us to understand that a single asset, which is the laptop, and a single threat, which is a burglar, has multiple vulnerabilities. There's multiple ways for that threat to be exploited. Each of these vulnerabilities may have a separate mitigation, a separate way of solving a problem, or you might combine them into a single mitigation. Either way, it's much easier to understand this risk now you've unpacked it into asset, threat, and vulnerability. So we can look at some of the other examples now. Our product knowledge is threatened by a senior product manager due to them wanting a better paid job, or they might want more progression in their job. Or they might have won the lottery and want to go live in Bali. My customer data is threatened by unauthorized access due to a weak password, or due to there being no multi-factor authentication, or due to there being unpatched systems. So again, we've got the asset, which is the customer data, the threat, which is unauthorized access, and a number of ways that unauthorized access can be attempted. So if we use the code example, we can say my customer data is threatened by incorrectly written code due to there being no peer review process, or due to mergers going directly into production, or using untested third-party libraries. So again, we've got the asset, which is customer data, the threat, which is incorrectly written code, and a number of different vulnerabilities. And again, you might choose to solve these with different mitigations or with the same mitigation. And this is key, right? Unpacking your risk like this is absolutely important, because when you say things like our customer data might be deleted, lots of people have lots of different assumptions about what that might mean and how they might solve that problem. But by unpacking the risk in this way, it allows you to identify specifically what the risks are, how they might come to pass, and what the risk is too. So by unpacking the risk in this format, we've gone from customer data might be deleted to 6 different types of risks with 6 different attack vectors. Final step of understanding risks is knowing what the consequences are, like what would happen if the risk came true. Okay, so we know what your asset is, we know what the threat to that asset is, and we know what the weakness or vulnerability that could be exploited of that threat is. But what would happen if that risk were to eventuate? And yes, that is a real word. Articulating the consequence of a risk happening is another key part of understanding that risk. If you don't know what the consequence of that risk happening is, then you don't really know whether to do anything about it or not. So understanding the consequence of a risk happening allows you to understand what you need to do and how quickly you may need to do it. Using the previous examples again, like unauthorized access to your data and it being leaked could lead to all kinds of nasty outcomes, such as ransomware or your data ending up on some dark corner of the internet to be sold by somebody else. This would eventually lead to potentially significant damage to your reputation. So mitigating that risk is probably pretty important. On the other hand, key staff leaving might not be so bad. The consequence of your senior engineer leaving and taking that technical knowledge with him might be lowered because you've got other senior engineers and they know probably just as much about the system as that person does. And if they don't, then it's going to be pretty easy for them to pick it up. Ultimately though, only you can understand what the consequences of the risks happening at your organization are. But having them articulated as part of your risk description and as part of the discovery process gives you all the information you need to later on assess the risk and understand what to do about it and how quickly. So we've got our asset, our threat to that asset, the vulnerability that exploits that threat, and the consequences of that threat coming true. And you can put all of this together in a stanza that looks like this. An asset is threatened by threat due to vulnerability, and this will lead to consequence. If you spend some time coming up with your risks and unpacking them and putting them into this sentence, it makes the next step in the process of risk assessment and risk mitigation that much easier, because you've got all the information contained within the risk that you need to be able to make a call on what to do next. In the next video, we're going to look at how you assess the likelihood of that risk happening and the impact of that risk happening, and then how to decide on the strategy for mitigating that risk and what your risk appetite is, or what your threshold is for dealing with risks. Thanks again for watching. I do hate saying this, but please like this video and hit the bell button to subscribe. The more subscribers I get, the safer we can make the internet. Until next time, Mike out.